We are going to record this session today as we do our monthly Zoom meetings. So welcome everybody, good to see you all. If you haven't put your name and organization into the chat, go ahead and do that. We like everybody to know who everybody is and where everybody's from. And I'm going to turn it over to Colette Cox, and she's going to introduce our guests today.
Thank you, Pat. So I'm Colette Cox. I'm the Vice President of the Chamber, and I really appreciate everyone coming out for this special topic today. We have our expert guests that we've invited. We've got Caitlin Piper from the Salt Lake Chamber, and she's the Director of Community Policy. And then we have Ari Bruin. Say your last name for me, Ari.
Bruning.
Who is with Envision Utah. And then we also have Jim Wood with the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. So we'd like to welcome our special guests today. And we have a lot of people online today, and we have 3 speakers to get through. So we're going to ask that you please keep yourselves muted and put all questions in the chat. We will get to as many questions as possible. We may not be able to get to all questions, but we will get to as many as we can. So with that, I will turn the time over to the team, and we can go ahead and get started.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. I'm Caitlin Piper. As was mentioned, I'm with the Salt Lake Chamber, and I'm really pleased to be with this group today. I really love going to Kanab and visiting, so great to be with this group. I represent the Salt Lake Chamber on the Housing Gap Coalition, and it's in that capacity that I'm hoping to speak with you today. So if you give me a second to share my screen. Okay, if you can just let me know that you're seeing what I'm projecting.
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Right, so I'm hoping to, my role in this triad of people is to kind of kick off the broad topic, talk about the basic issue that we're seeing across the state, and then really dive into best practices for housing affordability as identified in a Kempsey Gardner report, whose primary author is on our call, Jim Wood. So hopefully if there are any questions about my report, we can defer them to the writer of the report. I'm hoping that I can just give you kind of a flyby overview of what's going on, and that you'll be able to refer to the report later for more in-depth discussions on solutions and best practices. So without any further ado, just putting some data in front of you to illustrate what we mean when we say housing gap. The Housing Gap Coalition's purpose is to address the housing gap situation. And that gap is the discrepancy between housing units and households in Utah. As you're all aware, we're seeing some astronomical growth in our state, which is only compounded by the recent global pandemic and some of the shifting dynamics that we're seeing with that. But this isn't a new issue. So if you look back to 2010, you can see that our number of households really outpaced our dwelling units. And we've made some great progress in building the gap closed in recent years. You can see that we've built more dwelling units than households, but we still have an estimated gap somewhere above 50,000. What that doesn't mean is that we have 50,000 Utah households who are homeless or wandering. We're talking about people who could enter the housing market, but are unable to because of current shortages and affordability issues increasingly. And so so we're seeing doubling up, we're seeing very creative solutions, we're seeing roommate situations like you have all experienced, particularly in your region. So again, Housing Gap Coalition is about addressing the housing gap. And of course, when you have a shortage, there's also affordability is also impacted. And so this data only goes through 2018, but you can see the median sales price of new single family homes versus the percent of households who are able to afford these homes. And you can compare the 2018 to the 2010 situation and recognize that we really are in a situation that is quickly becoming drastic and dire. Utahns are being priced out of homes. Housing prices are increasing at a pace that's 2 times faster than the increase of household incomes. And we're seeing greater percentages of Utahns who are cost burdened, who are paying significant amounts of their income towards housing and housing solutions. I can cover briefly some of the reasons that are driving up housing costs. Obviously, the shortage is pushing those up. Construction and labor costs are increasing, and kind of astronomically, as we've seen in the last year. Local zoning ordinances are a big issue, as is NIMBYism. In other words, the attitude of not in my backyard, build it somewhere else. Yeah, we need more houses, but not here. Wasatch Front specifically, we have land costs because of topography and limited space in between the mountains. Demographic growth is we're booming, and the economy is as well. The global pandemic, as we've mentioned, has placed both an economic strain on households, while at the same time lowering interest rates, making it more affordable to join the market, which then again has decreased the availability of homes. And of course, Zoom City phenomenon. You may have seen the recent LinkedIn study that showed that Utah is actually one of the places that people are coming to now that they don't need to be tethered to big cities on the coasts in order to be employed. You're welcome to learn more about this by following this Kemsey Gardner study that was released in 2018. It's very illuminating. The Salt Lake Chamber's Housing Gap Coalition commissioned an additional study from the Kemsey Gardner Policy Institute, and that's what I'll be referencing and summarizing today. It's called Housing Affordability: What are Best Practices and Why Are They Important? Some of the basic findings of this study to keep in mind is that there is no single practice that's going to address all of the issues. It's really a combination coming at it from all sides, from all quarters of our state. Also keep in mind that success is measured in small increments. It can be, while we may see just a small increase in units, that can do a lot in a community. And particularly in rural, I think you're familiar with that dynamic where 1 or 2 or 3, housing units can really have a big impact on the overall situation. And finally, land use regulations determine the effectiveness of all best practices. And so time and time again, we come back to zoning because it really is so integral to the solution. So with that in mind, I'll just start by talking a little bit about zoning. Zoning essentially determines where housing can be built, how it can be built, and this has been an issue. This has been the dynamic in our country for the last 100 years or so. And it's until recently, housing policy discussions rarely included talk about zoning. But because of our extraordinary demographic and economic growth in the last decade, it's brought zoning to the forefront of housing policy discussions. Why is zoning so important? Why is it a best practice? You can see here that it provides a powerful policy tool to increase the supply of housing. It's zoning regulations more than any other local policy that governs the annual supply of single family and multifamily housing. And as we've seen in recent years, the supply of housing has not met the demand. And so it can provide a counterweight to housing price increases as well. Since 2015, the median sales price of a home in Salt Lake County has increased from 269,000 to 405,000. We've seen comparable increases in the mortgage prices. And so it can provide that counterweight. Thirdly, it provides the most effective policy response to changing housing preferences. We've seen that preference has shifted toward multifamily living, and yet most of our zoning is still accommodating single family housing. We've spoken a lot about diversity and inclusion in the last year and how we're seeing spatial concentrations of lower income renters and households of color. This can provide a way to equalize the situation and allow for more people to have not just better housing opportunities, but better educational opportunities and work opportunities. It can also facilitate long-term economic growth and employment opportunities. We've seen how in Silicon Valley or places like New York City, that restrictive zoning ordinances have constrained the housing supply, which limits employment growth and leaves many workers poorer due to the mismatch between where people live and where they work. So it can really help that and facilitate the effectiveness of all other best practices. I'm assuming this group is familiar with SB 34, which was a bill passed a couple of years ago that tied transportation funding to the implementation of affordable housing plans for cities. And so zoning also is one of the options that cities could select from as an approach to addressing their situation. The implementation involves political and civic engagement. Everyone needs to be on board to talk about how to reform zoning or how to approach it in a way that will be more advantageous to a greater number of Utahns. Community engagement is also big. Typically, new residential or commercial developments require a zoning variance or conditional use permit, which triggers then public hearings. And so the community gets involved. So we need to educate our community to ensure that they understand what's at stake if they are not receptive to changing zoning practices. And complementary policies, of course. The study contains some great instructive examples of best practices, cities that have adopted form-based code and other solutions, adaptive reuse and things like that. There's some wonderful municipal leaders who, again, potentially this group could reach out to for inspiration on how they've handled zoning changes and how they've implemented these best practices. So let's move on from this topic to preservation. This is the second best practice identified in the study. The preservation and rehabilitation of existing affordable units typically costs at least 40% less than the cost of a new affordable rental unit. So the idea here is let's preserve some of these units that already exist and ensure that they don't get destroyed or turned over to something else. So typically what happens is privately owned subsidized rental properties are required to remain affordable for a specific period, depending on the program. And then once that requirement expires, the owner has a couple of options about what to do. And so if we can ensure that we're getting in there and making sure that these already affordable units stay in the market, then we can see some of these following benefits. Low costs will be preserved, as well as affordability and investment. All of the investment in these units is typically lost if the owner opts out of this program. It allows us to counter rapidly rising housing costs in hot markets, and allows us to access multiple well-established funding sources. The low-income housing tax credit program has been the most important source of funding for the acquisition and preservation of existing affordable units. And it allows us to recapitalize on affordable units, as well as it's being way less controversial and enjoying much more broad support from community members. So it's a little bit easier to preserve than it is to come in and build. And again, satisfies SB 34 requirements. Implementation, again, involves prioritizing this as a method, identifying at-risk properties. So it would be great to create an inventory of at-risk affordable projects, where they are, to contact owners regarding their intentions about opting out and whether they need recapitalization. And targeting resources for preservation, as well as collaborating with preservation entities. So that's kind of what you would want to do to implement this best practice. And again, there's some great examples in the report. NeighborWorks Salt Lake is a 40-year-old local nonprofit that's really focused on housing preservation and rehabilitation in 2 Salt Lake neighborhoods, the Guadalupe neighborhood and Murray. And as well as just there were 2 public housing authorities who did a rehabilitation project as well. So things to pursue further if you're interested in this particular practice. Moving on to best practice number 3, redevelopment agencies and tax increment financing. That's typically abbreviated to RDAs. RDAs in Utah have used tax increment financing for over 40 years, or excuse me, 50 years to spur economic development. Tax increment financing is used to help finance investment, generally for 20 to 25 years, in a targeted geographical area that's been designated as a project area. So at the establishment of a project area, the current local property tax revenue from the land and structures within the area becomes the base amount of property tax revenue. And as then economic development occurs in the project area, property values rise, property tax revenues increase, and then the incremental increase in property taxes above that base amount provides the funding for redevelopment. And these funds often finance an RDA bond for infrastructure development like roads or sidewalks, sewers, etc. Or the funds can be used to pay for land and construction of affordable housing within the RDA. So again, this is a best practice because it provides funding targeted for housing needs of moderate and low income households. It can provide funding for multiple uses, among which is affordable housing. And it's a self-financing source of funds and a stable source of funding. It doesn't require approval at the ballot box or anything. It just funds itself. And it provides an opportunity for public-private partnership, as well as provides an opportunity to offset the higher housing prices that result from gentrification as these areas revitalize. And finally, it allows local officials to handpick developer and location of affordable housing. So without relinquishing control, they can kind of implement this. Again, implementation involves establishing the project area, developing a strategy for housing fund expenditures, and then assessing the policy considerations. So takes some work, but again, some great examples coming out of Salt Lake with the West Capitol Hill project area and a couple of others that you can refer to. Best practice number 4 is accessory dwelling units. This, as you are, I'm sure, aware, is just any smaller dwelling on the same property as a single family structure. It can be attached or detached. And we've recently seen some great policy on the state level addressing this. Why they're great, it's pretty self-explanatory. They provide an affordable housing option. They allow units to be delivered to the market much more quickly than your typical home construction. And they generate wealth because the homeowner can rent these units out, right? And then reap those benefits. And they appeal to all ages. It can be a wonderful solution for aging parents or first-time homeowners or renters or whatever, people just entering the housing market. And they fit into existing neighborhoods, as well as typically being environmentally sustainable, having much smaller square feet on average. And it's actually one of the most popular SB 34 requirements that was selected by cities around here. As we mentioned, implementation involves zoning. It all comes back to zoning and approvals, and then financing solutions are very helpful to incentivize. HB 82 passed this last year and aimed at reducing regulations for attached ADUs and coming up with a financing solution, a loan solution. There have been some really great implementations of this in California and Oregon that you can read more about in the report. But hopefully we can introduce that into Utah as well. Last but not least, transit-oriented development. It has the advantage of reducing transportation costs and increasing access to jobs, education, essential goods, local services, you name it. There are countless benefits, some of which include providing infill development, providing opportunity for increased high-density housing and reduced transportation costs. Obviously, TRAX has been really integral to all of that in the Salt Lake area. It allows existing transportation infrastructure to be utilized and just focus growth around those hubs. And it allows access to multiple funding sources, since financing for TODs can come from public and private sources, including federal grant funds. And they revitalize neighborhoods and create a sense of space and community in ways that are really great, as well as satisfying SB 34 requirements. Implementation involves multiple stakeholder coordination and accommodative zoning, ensuring that zoning is in place to allow for this type of development. SB 217, also passed in 2021, will be a great incentive for more of this TOD construction to be implemented. And there are examples across the valley that have been implemented. That's it for my basic broad kickoff. And with that, I'm hoping I can turn the time over to Jim Wood with the Gardner Policy Institute and let him take it from here.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Been to Kanab many times, love the community. And in fact, worked on a housing project down there some years ago, Lazy Days Apartments, tax credit project. But as Caitlin ran through the best practices, I guess those that would be most applicable to your community would be the ADUs, possibly preservation. You've got the 2 tax credit projects there, Lazy Days and I think Montezuma Apartments, a total of about 47 units. And you don't want those to age out. They're both been in the program for some time and they are affordable. And the Utah Housing Corporation works very hard to make sure that projects that are affordable are maintained as affordable when they reach their period. They've had several different over the years timeframes, and I'm not sure on. I think those might be in at quite a long period. Now it's only 15 years, but anyway, and the other is, of course, really is zoning. Zoning is by far the most impactful of the best practices. It influences and affects all of the other best practices. As Caitlin said, with like ADUs, you got to have a probably some change in the zoning. So that is really an important issue. We had a brief discussion with Colette at the beginning for about 15 minutes. She gave us the backstory on what are some of the issues in Kane County and Kanab. Those issues in the best practices, we didn't focus on resort communities, tourist communities. They have a special category and they have special problems. And they usually revolve around workforce housing. Worked up in Summit County a bit with Park City and the county, also down in Washington County with Springdale, Heber as well. And it sounds like from Colette's description that what you have in Kanab and Kane County is very similar to what those other resort communities, including Moab, all struggle with the issue, particularly in recent years, of workforce housing. How are we going to supply the workforce housing? You got a couple of competing interests involved. One would be the short-term rentals, and which runs, I guess, head on to property rights. I know that was a big issue over in Springdale, and the use of one's personal property becomes an issue. And but that's what city councils do, and local voters. They shake that process out, and through, the economy works in a political environment. And in the end, as Colette was describing the issues, it really comes down to what are the boundaries that the political establishment set. And again, zoning zoning determines what kind of housing we get, what price, and where it is. And if you need more workforce housing, certainly zoning is zoning for high density. because of the nature of your employment base, you're going to have affordable housing, and that means probably some tax credit projects, and maybe some sweat equity projects. I'll talk about both of those as possible, at least partial solutions to what confronts the community now. You are part of certainly what's going on throughout the state, where we've seen just this escalation and acceleration in housing prices. And we've had this housing shortage now for some time. It is improving a bit because, as Caitlin showed in that chart, but it is it's interesting that I've been involved in the housing market for a number of years, and more than I like to admit, and seen many different cycles since the 1970s to the present. This one's quite unique because in a couple of respects. One, it really has past cycles. They affected the home ownership, but this time not only home ownership but also rental, and not only in the Wasatch Front but also statewide. So this is really a unique and comprehensive crisis that we have. I would consider it a crisis for those who are trying to get in. Those that are at less than half of the median income, it is a crisis. They face a housing crisis almost daily. But what I've worked on as I mentioned earlier, in Kanab was a tax credit project. And I understand that you have one market rate project that's has been proposed and is on pause right now because of high construction costs and changing costs. And that is affecting many projects throughout the state, particularly the lumber costs. But I would encourage, that's a sizable project. Colette said, I believe, around 100 units. And is that right, Colette?
Yes.
Yeah, 100 units. That's a sizable project for, I think, the data I've looked at earlier today, you have about 700 units, rental occupied units in Kane County. And that addition of 100 units would certainly be, that would be a real infusion of new high quality product, and that would really help. So I don't know the details of that project. What Colette said in terms of the rental rates, it sounded like they would be affordable, particularly a roommate situation or two income household would be able to manage those rental rates to somewhere between 800 to 1100. So that would be a big step forward, I think, in providing workforce housing. And the prospects of additional need for workforce housing, of course, is, and you're probably all familiar with what's going on over at Zion and the East Gate, East entrance. So there's going to be a growing need, and but tax credit projects are truly affordable. It'd be even more affordable than the proposed project. I would encourage that what's in some communities, they partnership with public-private partnership, and you get a nonprofit that does development out in the rural areas of the state, and there are a few that do that. And to get another tax credit project, you haven't had one since 2000. You only have 47 out of 600 to 700 rental units, and that's a share of the rental market that is below average. It's about 10% across the state of the inventory of a county is in tax credit units, and you have something less than that, 7-8% or so. So, and there are a couple of programs. One is, which is also a tax credit program. It's called the Crown Home Program, and it's a terrific program. It's incremental. It doesn't supply a lot of units. I don't think you have any Crown Homes in Kane County. A Crown Home, the program provides a generally 3 to 4 bedroom project or unit. I've worked on Crown Homes in areas smaller than Monroe, smaller than Kanab, out in the basin, worked on some. They're really ideal for some of the rural areas, and they usually do them in about a group of 4 to 6, either townhomes or detached single-family homes. Just worked on some up in Beaver, and that was 4 units, detached single-family homes. The contact there is Kelly Peterson at Utah Housing Corporation. He's the one who, Utah Housing Corporation is over the tax credit program, and he usually joins with a nonprofit and encourages Crown Home development. Of course, the issue is always finding a couple of parcels of land where they can do it. But the way the program works is you get say, for example, up in Beaver, the ones we just worked on, 1,400 square feet, 4-bedroom, 2-car garage, fenced yard, and the rent on those is going to be a little less than $800 a month for a 4-bedroom. Now, that unit ages out after 15 years, and whoever's in it in the 15th year, whatever they've paid in rent goes into the equity of the home, the purchase of the home. And so if a resident stays there for the entire 15 years, they've got gold, and they're going to get into that home at a very good price. In the meantime, they've been renters. Oftentimes there's turnover, of course, and so if the last renter is there from the 13th to the 15th year, they have a right to buy that, and their contribution in rent would go towards the purchase of the home. So it is really a good program. But as I said, it's fairly small, but it's very affordable, and it gets people into home ownership. So it's terrific. And there's another program that was run by Brad Bishop, Rural Housing Development Corporation, and they do sweat equity. And he's done over 500 homes in rural Utah. Right now in the Southwest, the only county they're working in is Washington County, but that would be probably a program that would has, I think, some real positive attributes that it's the residents put in about 70% of the sweat equity. They build several homes, and they all, it's a community effort, and they all participate in the construction of 4 to 6, 8 homes. And so it's collegial, and it's a community, and he's done a lot of units and received national awards for his work. So that's another contact on the rural side. But again, it comes down to, you know, those competing interests, and if you want your business communities to thrive, you've got to have workforce housing, places for people to live. They can't commute long distances. And again, we are running into, on the other side, you've got these, the short-term rental along with now Zoom locations or remote living, where Colette said that's even, and you're getting people moving in from outside the state to work remotely. I was out in Uinta Basin a couple of months ago at Roosevelt, working on a project up in Roosevelt, and unsolicited, the president of the Realtor Association said, we're getting people coming in here now that they can work remotely. And I didn't ask him if it was from the Wasatch Front or out of state, but it appears to be, at least anecdotally, it's going on throughout the state, not just along the Wasatch Front. So, that's putting, and generally, if they're coming from out of state, they probably are putting some upward pressure on housing prices. And we've seen that I know up in Summit County, the economic development director up there said they're really, and as well as some builders I've talked to, that out-of-staters are really are pushing the market a bit. So those are working counter to affordability, unfortunately. But anyway, there are programs out there that provide affordable housing in rural areas. And oftentimes it's a public-private partnership. There are excellent nonprofits that will get involved in the development that have a lot of experience in development of tax credit projects. And I think Lazy Days, that's, like I said, 20 years ago. You need another 50 unit project, at least tax credit project. Well, Lazy Days, I think, was only, I don't know, it's like 27 or 30 units.
It's 30 units.
Is it 30? Okay.
I managed it for 7 years. It's tax credits over this year.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. How was the, were you always full? Was the occupancy?
Our occupancy is full. We're tax credit. I just quit there 2 weeks ago. So we're tax credit, and we are rural development as well. Occupancy is always full in your 1-bedroom units. We have turnover in our 2-bedroom units. It's hard to find people that, it's a much shorter list in our 2-bedroom units because it's hard to find qualified people to move into it.
Because they earn too much?
Yes, because they definitely, if there's 2 people working, they can't live in it underneath the regulations for the income limits. Also because a lot of people that do qualify for it have felonies within the last 7 years, which prevents them from being able to be in the program. We had an investor last year that spent almost a year or 8 months worth of time trying to get another credit property here, a 28 unit one tax credit. She even flew out to Washington a number of times and spoke to people out there. They gave all of the tax credits to Cedar City because they're a college town. The other thing that harms us here is that we don't have a housing authority. So that minimalizes the types of low-income housing that we can give to people from outside of the area.
So what housing authority do you work with over in Washington County, or just freelance? There's no? Well, yeah, that's a housing authorities really, they are instrumental in securing and I think motivating developers to come into a market. So that's that is a disadvantage you have. I know I've worked with over in Cedar, and they're quite active. So I'm not sure what it takes to set up a housing authority, but that's something that should take under consideration. There are 18 housing authorities in the state. We got 29 counties, and in some places, a nonprofit will provide those services. But
It's definitely something that we're looking into through the county and
Yeah.
through the city. It's been talked about, yeah.
Is
Good.
it not the 5-county Association of Government?
No, housing authorities are separate from the AOGs. I don't know if an AOG could act as a housing authority. I don't know any. Well, maybe up in Bear. No. Oh, I don't think so.
Something
So-
we'll have to
Anyway,
explore with our local leaders,
yeah.
for sure.
Anyway, well, I appreciate being with you. And the Cam Gardner Policy Institute, which is part of the School of Business at the University of Utah, we have a group of about 30 economists and demographers, statisticians that work on the Utah economy, and we've had a long history with the housing market. And any way we can help, we want to interface with the community and cities and counties, and particularly on housing at this point, where we are in this really a difficult time for people to get in, even to rental units, and certainly want to whatever we can do to help people move from rental to home ownership and the creation of wealth. We want to really facilitate that any way we can. But good to be with you, and thanks, Caitlin. And I'm going to turn it over to Ari.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to take a little bit different tack here than the people who went before me, since I feel like Jim is the expert on different affordable housing techniques and so on. So I'm going to back up and let's see if you, do you see my screen now? Is it working?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So real quick, just a brief introduction to Envision Utah. We are, let me do the math, 24 years old, founded in 97, on the Wasatch Front by folks who were looking at the growth that was happening there and saying, where is this taking us? Is it going to lead to a high quality of life in the future? We need a vision for where we're headed. So Governor Levitt and others were all involved. And we worked with the public to get 20,000 people to participate and come up with a vision for the Wasatch Front and back. Since that time, we've been growing more into our name to be Envision Utah rather than just Envision Wasatch Front. We've been doing more outside the Wasatch Front, talking to folks like you. And I think the discussion, where I want to take the discussion, is kind of to this principle of bringing people together and having a vision, because from my sense of where Kanab is at this point is you're kind of at that point, in 10 to 20 years, what do you want to be when you grow up is kind of the question. Do you want to be an exclusive, expensive resort community? I mean, do you want to be Springdale, for example? Or would you rather be less exclusive and more booming and allow more to happen, more growth, et cetera? I don't know what a good example of that is. Maybe Moab a little bit. Do you want to diversify the economy and not just be a tourism economy, attract businesses and so on? Do you want to stay a small rural town? And now I don't know if that's even an option at this point. You've been discovered, right? So maybe there's something you can do to try to be that, or is there something else you want to be? And I think if you have that conversation as a community, then I think it'll lead to some clear decisions on housing and other issues. And you can think through with each of these, what are the implications for the residents? What's our quality of life like? How prosperous are we going to be? How how far away from your work do you have to live? You know, you think about that exclusive expensive resort community, for example. You need employees to serve some of the tourism and so on who aren't going to be able to afford to live there. And so they're probably going to be coming from far away. So thinking through those kinds of things. And then what does that mean for housing policy? Are you restrictive on your housing policy? That's going to make you expensive. Are you going to be less restrictive and allow more development and be less expensive? But there are other consequences of that. So I think that's kind of the conversation that I think the Kanab area needs to have together. And I think way to go about that. This is the process that Envision Utah pioneered. I don't think it's rocket science, but you bring the stakeholders together. So on this call, we have a whole bunch of the stakeholders who can participate in the process, lend their expertise, and so forth, and also can help get the word out to average citizens to participate. Those kinds of things. Understand the values of the residents. What do they really want in their life? What do they want for this place, and why? And then do scenarios. I just walked through some off the top of my head scenarios, but put together some scenarios for, pick whatever horizon year you want, 2030, 2040, whatever it is, and make those plausible and realistic, and bring those and the implications to the residents. And then I think by getting people to participate in this process and getting everybody on the same page with where you want to go, I think it'll make some of the decisions that you need to make on housing and other issues a little clearer, and also easier to implement because people will be on the same page. So that's the overview of my suggestion of where you are. Now, just to give you a real quick example, we just helped Utah County do an effort they called Valley Visioning, and they're looking at doubling in population by 2050. And we set to work on a process that involved those elements I just walked you through. So we did a first phase of listening. So we did workshops with the various residents. So they were able to sit down around a map and wrestle with trying to accommodate 600,000 new people in the county by 2050, and asked them, where would you put them? What would it look like? And then we also did some survey work to find out what people were interested in, what the issues were for them. And then we took all that and we worked with our stakeholders to put together some scenarios, and worked with people to model some of the outcomes of that, brought that back to the public. And then 11,000 people weighed in online on what they liked or didn't like about the different scenarios. And then that led to the vision for the county. Now, interestingly, that vision was led by the chambers of commerce. So we're talking here as a chamber of commerce. All of their chamber of commerces came together and formed an association of Utah County chambers. The Utah Valley Chamber kind of was leading the effort, but they partnered with us then to do this visioning effort, and partnered with all the various cities in the county to make sure they were on board and what came out of it would be implemented. So how much time we got? Okay, we'll keep going. So as I mentioned, in that first phase, we got about 3,000 people to take a survey. We did 12 different public workshops. I'm just going through this example really quick, but here's an example of scenarios. So as we digested the way people in the workshops did their different maps, we came up with 5 different ways the county could grow. So we had a kind of a baseline of, if we just keep doing it the way we've been doing it everywhere, to other end of the spectrum, we build up rather than out. That scenario E, urban infill, and all of these scenarios seem plausible. So we brought them to the public. We showed them the implications of the different scenarios in terms of how much agriculture land they would lose, how long it would take them to get places, how much money they'd spend driving, those kinds of things, how much water they'd use. And got 11,000 people to react to those scenarios. And then that led to this vision. So these were the 7 things that we heard pretty clearly from everybody that they wanted. Everything from wise water management to a variety of housing options that match what people want and can afford. They want some agriculture left and so forth. Now, the hard part is, how do you get there? And so that kind of boiled down to, based on how people reacted to the scenarios and things, to 5 different strategies that seemed broadly supported. Walkable mixed use centers and so forth, things that maybe much more applicable on the Wasatch Front than to Kanab, but Kanab may have other strategies that would get you to where you want to go. And then we worked with the cities to put together a map for how that might play out. So my sense is Kanab's, you're kind of ready for something like that, have that kind of discussion, and let's, get the public, the stakeholders, the elected officials together, get to the same page and say, this is our vision for what we want Kanab to be. And let's figure out how to get there and, implement housing strategies that match that, and work with Jim Wood on some of the best practices and so forth. And that's kind of my advice to you at this point. So with that, I'm even 3 minutes early.
Thank you, Ari. And if everyone will just drop a note in the chat, we are considering hosting a housing forum and bringing the community together and bringing in some, our presenters today, if they are available, and really talking about the housing issue and how we can, from a business perspective, attack the housing issue, because, the number one thing we hear about from our business owners is housing. And the second thing is lack of employees, and they're tied together. And so I know that you all are experiencing that firsthand. And like Ari said, it's Kanab and Kane County is really primed to come together with the business community, local government, nonprofits, and private industry to come up with some solutions. We've got some projects in the works. We've got some projects started, and they're definitely taking pressure off, but that's all it is. It's just a little bit of pressure. And so again, the long-term planning and the orchestrating of some real housing, long-term housing solutions need to happen now. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for joining us. You did a fabulous job. And we do have just a couple minutes for questions before I turn the time over to Jackie Hobson from the SBA. Any questions? We don't have time to unmute and ask questions, but if you have a question, drop it in the chat. And to our panel, it looks like Jim had to run, but Judah has a question. He said, how long do these projects take from ideation to occupancy typically? I don't know if Ari, you could answer that.
I'm the wrong person to answer that. So.
That's really a Jim question, isn't it?
That is a Jim question, yeah.
Maybe we'll call on the other James on the line here, since he has some ideas. Go ahead, James.
Are we talking about low-income housing tax credit projects specifically?
Talk to that. I would say talk to that of private and these special projects.
Yeah, so James Wood talked about a few different types of projects or solutions, housing solutions, one of them being Crown Homes. Those things can go in, they have about a year lead time of planning. Typically, it can be less than that. I know, actually, I work for Utah Housing Corporation, and I know that the company, not me, it's not my department, but the company is looking at doing Crown Housing in Kanab right now. But they know, they're checking the political environment, and that's very important to them. So, that needs to be addressed. And then, of course, it's finding dirt. It's finding a lot. And I think there are lots available in Kanab right now. So, there could be a Crown project going in by the end of this year, realistically. Now, a low-income housing tax credit project, those things have a lot longer lead time. And it's already been noted in the chat that those things and Kanab, you've experienced that they just get turned down for various reasons, and which is super unfortunate. I do know that had they applied in the bonus round that just happened, the score would likely have been very, very favorable. So it's unfortunate they did not apply. I have no reason. I have no idea why they did not. I really don't. But hey, there's another round in the fall, and there's appetite and there's realization that Kanab is growing. At Utah Housing Corporation, we look at a lot of data A lot of it is from James Wood, along with other resources, but it's obvious that the growth from St. George is moving east and the growth from Page is moving west, and what's smack dab in the middle is Kanab. So, whether people like it or not, it's coming. So why not prepare for it so that we can shape the flavor of it?
Thank you so much for jumping in since Jim had to jump off. We appreciate your expertise. And by the
Sure.
way, if you didn't see James's message in the chat, James Mosdell grew up in Kanab and like he says, works for the say it
Utah
one more time, Utah Housing Corp. So thank you so much. And we are out of time right now. We did record this if you had to jump on late or want to review any of the material that was presented today. Pat will be sending that out through our chamber listserv. And I'm going to give the last couple minutes to Jackie Hobson. I'd like to introduce her. She is new to Southern Utah she has, I'll let her tell you about her job with the SBA. She's a great resource for all of our business owners in Kanab and King County.
Hey, thanks, Colette. I just really wanted to jump on and say hi. I don't know how many people were aware that St. George has been trying to get an SBA office for about 3 years, and Salt Lake, the district office, has been pushing really hard, and the government, takes some time, but we finally got it and we're here. But it's not just St. George. I'm really trying to see what Southern and rural Utah needs in general. So that's why I reached out to Colette and Pat, and I just said, hey, I want to be a resource for you guys. If you're not really aware what the SBA does, you can just remember they have 3 C's, right? So we do counseling to help business owners. A lot of that is done through our contracting partners, like the Small Business Development Center, the Women's Business Center, or SCORE. That's always free. It's great. I've ran many businesses and sometimes I've used them, and I also ran businesses before I knew they existed. And so it's a great resource that people should use. Like I said, we contract out that counseling, but then we also will do trainings in conjunction together. So I'll lead up a lot of trainings that I can do with chambers or with those counseling business advisors. Then the other C is we do capital, obviously. So we have the different 7A loans that we work with different lenders. Obviously, there was some capital stuff we've been trying to do during these COVID relief, this terrible situation. So that's been really heavy with the SBA. And then our third C is contracting. So we have a lot of set aside programs. We can actually get really hands-on if you qualify for like an 8A program where we're really helping you learn the ins and outs of contracting and things like that. So I'm sure in the future, I would love to drive it and make it out there and see you guys face to face, because that's always great. But just keep in mind that we're here. I'll put my contact info in the chat. But just because I have an office in St. George, I'm not only focused on them, and I want to help you guys out as well. So thanks.
Thank you so
Great.
much,
Thank you,
Jackie.
Jackie. Thanks so much. So looks like our time is up, everybody. Thank you so much to all of our special guest speakers today. I know Colette and I were taking lots of notes, and we're going to be talking about some next steps. And like she said, we did record this. So, Timothy and anyone else who joined a little bit late, look for that. That'll be coming out in the next day or so. And other than that, I will just wish everybody a good day, and we look forward to seeing you and talking with you again.